I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today's video is Die, my message to Antifa and thoughts on Portland and Breonna Taylor, right? A major escalation over the weekend, material escalation in Portland, where, after 93 days or so, who's counting really, of protests, mostly peaceful protests in Portland, if you believe CNN, and, it's been kind of like Seattle Redux. It's been just, all of the negative connotations of anarchy, of just rapes and murders and pillaging and looting and vandalism and the absolute and utter destruction of any sort of viable, inner, commerce to the city. And it's just ironic in the longer sense that there is an absolute real estate exodus. The revolutionaries think that they're going to achieve something useful with all of these protests. In reality, it's going to send these various metropolitan centers into death spirals, and they are going to, lose the tax revenue, the little that they had, because, there's no point in really operating a business in some of these places if you can't even keep it open. And, again, it's all a bunch of, broke commie losers anyway, so it's not like any of them were, patronizing customers, but unfortunately the rest of the people suffer. And, unfortunately, in Oregon, like in California, most of the state, is red counties, and people who still are connected to the land and to their family and to God and have meaning and purpose and happiness in their lives. And the metropolitan centers, on the other hand, which is basically full of atheist, communist, nihilists who are all miserable and totally addled, on various, drugs, and also, electromagnetic frequencies that are totally sending their cells and their psychology spiraling in the wind. It's a very real tactical situation that we are facing in this country right now. And, it doesn't surprise me, really. It's just interesting again, because Patriot Prayer, which is one of the guy who was shot in Portland, he had a Patriot Prayer insignia on his hat, and they're kind of, the leader of that group, Joey Gibson, is fairly cringe. But the point is, I don't need to agree with somebody to say that they should not just be hunted down and killed on the street. Because this was not even like a fight. This was a targeted murder based on someone's, just identity and just political affiliation. That I believe his name was Daniel Stevenson was the victim. And he was basically shot cold dead in the street. And it's just crazy because people, I guess in the video you can hear people saying, we got one over here, we got one, and that's just seconds before the shots ring out. And so this is, and the shooter, they believe that they've identified the shooter, and, it's another white guy, a commie loser, a former pro snowboarder, and, all around douchebag Antifa. And so that's, what's interesting is, there's, people of color and black men and black women and, men mainly in groups like Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boys. I wonder, if one of them was targeted and it was a white Antifa killing a black patriot, and, would it have been basically, peaceful protester, kills, white nationalist black person? The narrative is so insane. And, they've called Candace Owens white nationalist too. It's all a facade, and the people who, again, believe in this at this point, they're long gone, and there's nothing you can do for them. What we are fighting for is the sensible people in the middle of the country, the people who just want to live their lives and never really wanted to even talk about politics because it was just uncomfortable, and it made people divided, and it really didn't matter in the end. And it still doesn't matter. Again, the number of unarmed men and women, again, mainly men, I wonder why that is. Maybe it's implicit sexism in the system, right? That systemic sexism, that only men go to jail. Because obviously we must assume that, because communism, that all people, all genders, all races are fundamentally equal in all aspects. It is insane. the level of the critical theory that is being just blasted into people's brains, and even the younger kids have it the worst. And again, why they thought they were going to work through this nice little communist makeover to the education system via the COVID pandemic, and now it's essentially backfiring, and now homeschooling is off the charts, and there's more interest in homeschooling now than there's ever been probably in the last 100 years in this country, and that's a great thing. That is a absolutely critical keystone component of how we move forward into this alternate, optimistic, paradisical timeline. And so, yes, it's just very crazy to, returning to the ID of the shooter, right? Who needs artificial intelligence when you've got 4chan and weaponized autism, right? They ID'd this guy, and I guess he even was interviewed by Bloomberg on the street as about his opinion on the protests and whatnot. The mayor, Ted Wheeler, there's blood on his hands with this. He has totally abdicated responsibility and has basically ordered the police to stand down at a lot of these things. He could have the National Guard come in and help, but he decided to be a little bitch and sent a letter to Trump worded just like a bitchy woman. It's like no self-respecting man should ever even write a letter in the form that he did. It was so pathetic and just cat-like. Just we don't want your help. Just stay away. Who the fuck talks like that as a man? But, the answer is, of course, as we've talked about, the cucked liberal man who defers to women because he has no sense of psychic force or station himself and doesn't even believe that such things exist. He has no strength. He has no actual position within a meaningful, social hierarchy, and so he seeks out essentially false artificial ideologies to justify his own anomie and sense of inadequacy. But, I don't mean to necessarily cast down all liberal men, but actually I kind of do, because they've totally failed in their duty, right? The problem, it's like, as somebody yesterday pointed out, was that the problem within Islamic communities and Islamic terrorism is that people don't condemn it. They tacitly support it. And so because there is no social opprobrium and control via those social mechanisms, then it just gets absorbed by the community and supported by the community. Even if the rest of the community will say out front that they don't support it, when they're on camera or whatnot, they don't take the actions to actually control their own communities. And so community policing, is really a fallacy if we're talking about communities that don't actually have any incentive to self-govern. That it basically is a self-reinforcing criminal and corrupt system. And so, yeah, I guess we can talk about Breonna Taylor for a second. This is one that, again, like every single liberal woman I've known in my life, who I went to school with and whatnot, they are just, this hashtag is over and over and over again, justice for Breonna Taylor. For some reason, she's just, so, and I agreed at the beginning when I heard the story. I was like, oh, the police, just broke into the wrong apartment, and she was just started blasting, and shooting, and she was sleeping, and basically the cops killed her in cold blood. And I was like, wow, that's messed up. See, this is why I can understand that people, are against the police. And I didn't really, do a lot of research into it. There's so many of these, ginned up, situations. I'm really analyzing the social consequences and effects more than actually, using my time to go and dig into all these, horrendous stories of what happens. And again, I believe in genuine police reform. I'm not, necessarily back to blue, but the craziness of Antifa and the commies in this country has driven me into that camp, just like everybody in the country in the middle is being driven into, by default, Trump supporters. And that's, we'll see what happens in November, but I know, I know where I'm placing my bet, and I know where I'm placing my vote. You don't have to agree with every single thing that you think the Republicans stand for or have stood for in the past. You just have to understand that we are facing a actual they're going to fail, but they actually think that they are having a communist revolution. Like the guy who shot in Portland, right? He's like, posts on Instagram, I am 100% Antifa to the core. But anyway, Breonna Taylor. So the real story is that the police broke into and raided the correct house, and it was her boyfriend's house, who was basically like a crack dealer. He was basically a total, drug dealer. They had, dozens and dozens of cars. This was a whole stakeout that the police had done months ahead of time, and this was a trap house. It was a no-knock, raid under a warrant from a judge. And basically, he came out when they broke in. He basically, the guy, I don't know his name, I don't really care. He started shooting at the police, and so they responded and returned fire. Now that, basically this criminal, crackhead drug dealer was shooting at them. And basically, in the process, both he as well as Breonna were shot and killed. And it's not to say that that's not a tragic situation, but this is hardly the oh my God, justice for Breonna situation that I kind of, immediately was sold, as, that we were sold as. And it's, again, it's when you engage in a lifestyle that implies gangland murders and people getting shot and killed and people overdosing from drugs, and the way that you're making your living is by literally poisoning people and creating, hopeless addictions in an already devastated community. It implies a total Saturnalian aspect of lead core, of basically a person who doesn't even have humanity anymore, who just basically has just a black inside, right? It doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, but it does matter what you look like on the inside. And they like to say, well, we're all red and pink on the inside, but it's there is very much a spiritual component, and there's people who are filled with light, and there are people who are filled with darkness. And it's safe to say, based for in my experience and understanding of reality, that when you assist and facilitate selling crack and fentanyl and cocaine and all these tools of Satan, then you understand the risks of it comes with the territory, right? That people get shot and killed. And so the police were serving a warrant, and if he didn't want to, him and his girlfriend to get shot, maybe he wouldn't have started blasting at the police. It's just, it's same thing with George Floyd, and the same thing with Jacob Blake, and similar thing with Rayshard Brooks. I mean, these are street creatures. They're adult, and normal, rational people understand, even if you don't want to go to jail, when you're caught, all right? And you have to basically just comply, otherwise you're going to get shot. And it's like these people just don't understand that. And so, you can speculate for however you like to, explain why exactly it is that way, why what is plain rational behavior for one group of people is like an unsurmountable, goal, and the unclimbable height for others. I really don't think that it is. I think that we're making accommodations as a society in our narrative for incompetence and for evil, and we're saying that good and evil don't even exist. We're saying that order and law doesn't even exist, but it does. And if we don't remember these things at all times, then it's very quickly we can lose our entire civilization to chaos. And that is not a overly dramatic statement. That is, it's like, what is it, I don't really quote Ronald Reagan that often, but, we are always one generation away from losing liberty. And, one could argue in various parts of the country, you've already lost it, and these commies who run these cities, my advice is still, in general, for those with young family to protect, with kids, is you retreat from those cities. To the extent that they are hyper-liberal like that, this is going to continue, and it's going to get worse. So I would advise getting the hell out. And if you're in a city where it's not quite lost yet, then there is definitely more of an incentive to stay and fight and kind of contribute politically to try and bring the balance, back into favor of the light, in the true sense, rather than the Joe Biden facetious, meaningless sense. I am a warrior for the light. Donald Trump is the darkness. Like, what the fuck are we even talking about? This whole thing is so crazy at this point. Nobody's actually pro-Biden, but people are being forced to eat that bag of shit and pretend like they do. It's just amazing, like how any of and it doesn't matter how ridiculous the narrative, these people will lap it up. Again, they will put on their own handcuffs, they'll put on their own blindfolds, and they'll be the little sentinels and emissaries of the program, the mini Agent Smiths, except, rather than actual, violence and, a Desert Eagle, it's basically, just bitching and whining and using a keyboard on a laptop. And so, yes, there is a fight to be fought and a war to be won. And I don't want necessarily to advise people not to participate in their own form of gathering and showing essentially, of protest in the American tradition. And, I watched some of the videos of the protest, the Trump rally that ran through, Portland, and the guy who got shot, this was after most of them had left. And I guess he was probably on his way out and was walking down the street, and that's when he was hunted by this former snowboard pro, commie Antifa fucking loser. And, again, I will say that whenever you go anywhere in or near these liberal cities, even including those ones that aren't totally lost, like Sacramento, I would say, is not necessarily totally lost, but it's kind of in flux. And it's definitely, definitely not conservative, and the city council definitely is not, but the population here isn't the same as LA or San Francisco. There's still that strength on the other side, and that, moral structure. And we basically need to always be prepared to respond when we go into these places. There's not a single second that I come into Sacramento that I am not prepared to respond and to defend my life. It's not to say that I'm personally scared of anything that could be happening, or people targeting me, but I will say that whatever happens, whether it's intentional or unintentional, if it's just the wrong place at the wrong time, I'm very tactically secure in my movements. In general, I don't really just wander around or hang out outside. I don't really like walking around in cities very much anyway. People have this romantic fascination with cities. I never really understood it. But it's, get a concealed carry permit, learn how to be proficient with your firearm. Again, that's not the only form of defense, but, it's the great equalizer. You can be, a 100-pound woman or, a 300-pound man. It doesn't really matter as long as you can learn to, find basically a weapon that you can hold and aim and fire effectively. And, they are trying as hard as they can to, now push more gun control, but it's not going to work. This whole defund the police movement and all the riots has basically convinced a whole swath of Americans that they can't rely on that, protection system, that it's always in their own hands. And, the Kenosha kid, Kyle Rittenhouse, hopefully he gets a fair shake and he'll be totally exonerated under self-defense, or at least if he does get charged with a crime, it'll be procedural of, crossing state lines with a rifle as a minor or something. I don't know what the exact laws for those states involving those topics looks like, but it's clear that he was not some malicious person who was going out to hunt people like the guy in Portland was. And, it's crazy the amount of psychosis that has been ginned up in people's minds as a result of all this media nonsense of, Russia, and Trump's a racist, and he's supported by a whole system of white supremacy, implicit and systemic within the system. It is a corrosive and acidic philosophy. It has no basis in truth, and, That's the other thing. Sandia Labs, the lab that designs America's nuclear weapons. This is a sign that, you know, this this civil war in spiritual form and physical form is proceeding apace. And the mitosis of world is what was his name? Casey something. And he is basically an electrical engineer and veteran at Sandia Labs. So they designed the nukes for the Pentagon and for the American government. And they basically had a, you know, BLM heavy, you know, program session for their employees and racism training, and it was just straight, you know, straight BLM commie nonsense. And so he took them to task. I'll put the link down below so you guys can check it out. But he basically made a video and sent it out to his company, just explaining that systemic racism in 2020 is a myth. And just going through, and, you know, as a good, you know, rational white man, you know, I don't know if he's Christian, but he's definitely a rational white man, and he basically goes through and demolishes it all. And you know, again, there's not to say that facts and logic are going to actually convince many people on the other side at this point, but again, there's still the people in the middle who are trying to make sense of all this and don't want to get, you know, their businesses, you know, destroyed, and they don't want their family or themselves to get hurt, because we're now at a point where people are being hunted in the street for expressing peaceful protest, right? What they're so afraid of Trump doing, these anti-fascists, you know, they are the fascists. They are now actually just killing people because of an identification, right? They are doing exactly what they are claiming to be fighting against. And, you know, all in the name of defending, you know, a total degenerate crackheads and criminals, and, you know, for what? You know, just because they have no purpose, they have no meaning, and so, you know, chaos is their default form of entertainment. And so, yeah, it's just important to recognize that as long as people can't even agree that pedophilia is bad, like, there is a civil war that is inevitable. Understand that if we can't come to agreements on simple things like that, it's baked into the cake, my friend, and it is just important for us to become aware of that, to become, you know, understanding of that inevitability, and to just be prepared. Because our best, you know, chance here is that it just goes softly and we minimize the casualties. But, you know, the last civil war we had was, what, 600,000 deaths? I think we can do a little bit better than that, but this time around, but who's to say? Because Hillary Clinton even came on and said, under no circumstances should Joe Biden concede the election. So even in the event of the electoral blowout, which is coming, you know, basically they're saying that they're going to contest it, and this is the final last stand of the deep state. And so it's important for people from the top to the bottom to show them basically that we are here and not be afraid, and you know, understand that there will be danger. But we will be prepared, because we are the warriors of the light. And, you know, that's the way we roll. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.